You're welcome to study session 2. What is skepticism? Skepticism is any philosophical attitude which expresses doubt about the possibility of certain, reliable, or any knowledge whatsoever. Any philosophical position which doubts the possibility of human knowledge can be described as skepticism. A philosopher who claims that knowledge is impossible is a philosophical skeptic. Hence, we can say that philosophical skepticism is a position which claims that we cannot know anything about anything based on the following argument. To know something is to be certain that something is the case. That we can never be certain of anything, that is, we can never be certain that something is the case. Therefore, we cannot be said to know anything. If the above argument is valid, it will change all that we have claimed to know. If we accept it, then science is an illusion. It will then turn out that our day-to-day or ordinary claims that we know are false. We can conclude here that the skeptical argument is a challenge not only to ordinary common sense, which is convinced that we know something, but also to science, which we usually look up to as a reliable knowledge. Historical background of skeptical tendencies. Let us have an insight into skeptical tendencies in the past, which dates back to the pre-Socratic period. Skeptical tendencies are now not new in philosophy. In the history of philosophy, some skeptical arguments have been based on the unreliability or relativity of our senses. Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, says that we cannot step twice. This means things are constantly changing, with the implication that they cannot be known. His disciple, Cratylus, further explains that we cannot step into the same river once. This is so because fresh water is ever evolving on and upon us. Central to their position is the view that all things are in a state of flux. There is also an extreme skeptical view expressed by Gorgias of Leontini, another Greek philosopher. For him, nothing exists. If it exists, it cannot be known, and if it is known, it cannot be communicated. We also have Protagoras' relativist position, which can be described as partial skepticism. For him, man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not. The implication of Protagoras' statement is that human beings determine what is true, real, and acceptable. The implication of Protagoras' statement is that human beings determine what is true, real, and acceptable to them, and what is false, unreal, and unacceptable to them. Hence, what is true to you is true to you, and what is true to me is true to me. In contrast, what is false to me is false to me, and what is false to you is false to you. Hence, we cannot say there is any absolute standard through which truth can be determined. We can make a distinction between philosophical skeptic and a methodological skeptical. As we noted earlier, a philosophical skeptic holds that knowledge is impossible, not just knowledge in a particular sphere, but knowledge in general. But a methodological skeptic does not hold that knowledge is impossible. Rather, he maintains that a method of doubt is needed in order to arrive at knowledge. Methodological and philosophical skeptics in philosophy. An example of methodological skeptic is René Descartes, who wanted to find a firm foundation for knowledge. In order to do this, he proceeded as follows. He examined all the principles which we appeal to as sources of knowledge, that is, the principle that knowledge comes from our senses and the principle that knowledge comes from reason. Descartes tried to show that we can doubt our claims to know through the senses and through reason, and proceeded to look for something which cannot doubt, something which is certain. Through this procedure, Descartes came to doubt. Through this procedure, Descartes came to doubt not only all our scientific knowledge, but also our mathematical knowledge. He arrived at the conclusion that there is only one thing that he is certain he cannot doubt. This is the fact that he thinks, he doubts, and he believes, and if he thinks, he doubts, and he believes, it follows that the person who thinks, who doubts, and who believes must exist. He therefore concluded that he exists as a thinking being, an immaterial substance called the mind. Therefore, Descartes finds the foundation of all knowledge in the individual mind. An example of a philosophical skeptic is David Hume. Sometimes we claim that we know that because something has been happening in the past, then that thing will happen in the future. For instance, you may claim that the sun has been rising in the east and setting in the west for 1,000 years, therefore tomorrow the sun will rise in the east and set in the west. You may also claim that all metals that you have seen have conducted electricity. Therefore, the next metal that you will see will conduct electricity. You may further make another claim that all the pieces of gold that you have seen are yellow. Therefore, the next piece of gold you shall see will be yellow. For David Hume, there is no rational basis for thinking that all these beliefs are true. This is because it is logically possible that the sun will not rise tomorrow, or that the sun may rise in the west tomorrow and set in the north. It is also possible that we will come across a metal that does not conduct electricity. What is central to the above examples is that so long as what we believe to be true may turn out to be false, then we do not know such thing. This view is known as skepticism by inductive inference. It is a view commonly held by philosophical skeptics. Inductive knowledge is knowledge that is based on reasoning from the past to the future, or from what we have observed to what we have not observed. If, for instance, I infer from what I have observed in the past that the same thing will happen in the future, I have assumed that the future will be like the past, or that the unobserved will look like what I have observed. My assumption, then, is that nature is uniform, but David Hume has argued that we do not have any reason or any justification to believe that nature is uniform or that the future will be like the past. It is possible that the future will not resemble the past. We may wake up one day and find out that contrary to our past experiences, a magnet repels iron rather than attracts it. In other words, it is possible that the course of nature may change. You may want to ask the question, that's why then do we always believe that the future will be like the past? David Hume would want to reply that it is due to the habit of the mind and our customs. It is not due to reason or to the nature of things themselves. We should note from what we have discussed about skepticism that truth, certainty, and the possibility of reliable knowledge are central to the skeptic's position. We may then want to raise questions such as, can we have knowledge of things in the physical world? What kind of knowledge do we have? Can we ever be certain of any knowledge, claim, or anything whatsoever. Certainty is so central to any skeptical debate, and it is on the basis of this that the extreme skeptic would deny the possibility of all forms of knowledge based on the following argument highlighted by Ozumba. 1. That man does not have the capacity, the equipment to know things in a certain manner. 2. That our senses cannot penetrate the nature of things. 3. That the senses are deceptive and as such are unreliable in eliciting information about external objects or any other object for that matter. 4. All we have are appearances, and these appearances are themselves mutable, changing, in a state of flux, unreal, fleeting, unstable, and uncertain. 5. That our human judgments are always prone to error. We never can be sure that we are judging right. There are other skeptical arguments apart from the above listed ones. Skeptical arguments in philosophy. 3 major skeptical arguments will be examined below. This is to enable you have an insight into why the skeptics hold the position that knowledge is impossible. The brain's inverse argument. This argument has it that you do not know that you are not a brain, suspended in a vat full of liquid in a laboratory and wired to a computer which is feeding you your current experiences under the control of some ingenious technician or scientist. For if you were such a brain, then, provided that the scientist is successful, nothing in your experience could possibly reveal that you were, for your experience is X hypothesis. For your experience is X hypothesis identical with that of something which is not a brain in that. Since you have only your own experiences to appeal to, and that experience is the same in either situation, nothing can reveal to you which situation is the actual one. In essence, since you do not know that you are not a brain in a vat, you cannot know any proposition P, of which you know that if P were true, you would not be a brain in a vat. The above argument is a major skeptical argument, which attempts to show that we have no knowledge of the world around us. The argument hinges on the claim that we are not in a position to rule out the possibility that we are brains in a vat, being artificially stimulated to have just the sensory experience we are actually having. We have no basis for ruling out this possibility, since if it were actual, our experience would not change in any way. The skeptic, then, claims that if we cannot rule out the possibility that we are brains in a vat, we cannot know anything about the world around us. It is important to let you know that, as we often have in philosophy, arguments are not conclusive. They are open-ended because, for any argument, there are counter-arguments, such that one cannot conclusively say that he has arrived at the one true correct answer to questions. It is in the light of this that there have been responses to the brain inverse argument. The first response by some philosophers is that we can rule out the possibility that we are brains in a vat. Another response is by those philosophers who have also argued that we do not need to rule out this possibility in order to have knowledge of the world around us. The justification of argument from experience. This argument is similar to David Hume's skepticism by inductive inference, which we examined earlier in this lecture. Going by our earlier explanation, we may want to ask this question: do we have knowledge of events which we have not experienced, or we are not now experiencing? We normally suppose that our experience is a reliable guide to the external world, specifically physical objects within it, and that in favorable cases, it gives us knowledge. For instance, I can know what is in the bottom of my desk or what I shall eat for breakfast tomorrow by some form of inductive inference from what I have observed or am now observing. David Hume, a Scottish historian and philosopher, raised in a special way the question of whether this is really so. He argued that I cannot know that my diary is in the closed bottom drawer of my desk unless I have reason to believe my experience makes that proposition probable. We can suppose perhaps that my relevant experience is that I remember having put the diary there 5 minutes ago and that I do not remember having touched the drawer since, together with my general knowledge of consistent behavior of the experienced world. But I only have a reason to believe that my experience makes that proposition probable if I have reason to believe quite generally that events which I have not observed are similar to events which I have observed. And Hume's point is that it is impossible to have any reason for that last belief. For that belief is not analytically or necessarily true. No contradiction is implied by supposing it false. And I cannot suppose that experience itself has given me reason to believe that the unobserved will resemble the observed, since the appeal to experience begs the question asked. It argues from the crucial belief that our experience is a reliable guide, or that the unobserved will resemble the observed. Therefore, I can have no reason to believe that my experience is a reliable guide, and hence have no reason for any belief about events beyond my experience, and so I cannot have knowledge of them. It is worth stressing that Hume's argument is meant to stress the fact or general belief that experience as a reliable guide cannot be justified, since all promising justification assume what is at issue by opposing that experience can reveal that our experience is a reliable guide. We then say that central to skepticism, which Hume's arguments create, is the idea that we have no reason in what is observed by any beliefs about the unobserved. The argument from error. We all have sometimes made simple mistakes in whatever position we find ourselves. In mathematics, for example, we make simple mistakes, but there is nothing you can point to in your present situation which tells you that this situation is not one in which you are mistaken. Suppose I claim yesterday to know that it would rain in the afternoon on the grounds of weather forecast, gathering clouds and so on, but unfortunately, it turns out that I was wrong. At the time of my claim, the fact that it was not going to rain is evidence transcendent, as all claims about the future must be. This means that if on the same grounds I claim today to know that it will rain in the afternoon, I must continue to assert that I knew yesterday that it would rain that afternoon, that is, based on the same evidence. I cannot make the claim to know today, for the only fact which would justify such a difference in claim is one which is not available to me. Facts about the afternoon's weather are evidence transcendent in the morning. Hence, my acceptance that yesterday I did not know prevents me from claiming knowledge today. The conclusion seems to be that if I recognize that I have once wrongly claimed to know that P, then I cannot ever claim to know that P unless I can show a relevant difference between the two cases. And no one else can say of me that I know in one case and not in the other, because for all I know, I am wrong both times. Going by our analysis of this skeptical argument, we need to reflect on them for some time. When we think about skeptical arguments, we often find ourselves pulled in opposite directions. We feel the pull of the skeptical argument, and yet we remain reluctant to give up our claims to know. We can accept or reject skepticism depending on the argument we want to put forward. We can accept or reject skepticism depending on the argument we want to put forward. We can reject skepticism because it conflicts with our intuitions about our everyday knowledge claims. On the other hand, we may also decide to accept skepticism because truly our senses are sometimes deceptive, and as a result, we may sometimes be deceived to take object A to be object B. Study session summary. In this study session, we discussed arguments that are central to skepticism. We started by defining skepticism, after which we made a distinction between philosophical skepticism and methodological skepticism. We learned that skeptical tendencies are not new in philosophy by examining the historical background of skepticism. We also learned that because our senses are sometimes deceptive, we cannot be certain about our knowledge claims, and it is on this note that any skeptic would express his position about the impossibility of knowledge. We have come to the end of study session 2. Thanks for listening.